Okay, this is the second of our online lectures. You should have your notebook handy so you can take things down. You will take pictures of this and submit them to Canvas under Flip 2. They will be graded by other students anonymously, and you will grade other students anonymously as well. In the future, I am not going to collect and grade these. It's up to you to get the notes so that you can do well on our first test. So I'm going to begin by going back to the map. And some of you did a great job on this. Some of you put way more detail than you needed. I'm not sure how you're going to use it to study from. There's not a whole lot besides the bodies of water that I need you to know on this map. The path can be useful, but it's not necessary. I want to use this map, however, to talk about the structure of the Torah, or the structure of the Pentateuch. The first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, there's a real cohesiveness between Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, and I think the map demonstrates that. The story starts in Egypt, in Exodus chapter 1, with the Israelites being enslaved. We get the story of Moses being raised and fleeing from Egypt and being called by God. We have the 10 plagues on Egypt, the Passover story, and the departure from Egypt and the crossing of the Sea of Reeds. We end up at Mount Sinai in chapter 19. And we're at Mount Sinai for about a year while the Israelites make a covenant with God. And it's not until the book of Numbers, chapter 11, that the Israelites depart from Mount Sinai and head to the Promised Land. It's a journey that takes them 40 years. And we'll read some of those stories of the desert wandering later. But for now, I just want to focus on that. Think about the starting point is Egypt, the midpoint is Mount Sinai, and the eventual goal is the Promised Land. And if you look at it, it's the beginning of Exodus is the start of the journey, and the end of Numbers is the end of the journey. And all the stuff inside happens at Mount Sinai. Beginning in Exodus 20, Moses receives the law from God, and it continues all the way to the end of Exodus, chapter 40. Everything in Leviticus is law, priestly rules, and regulation. And then the first 10 chapters of Numbers are also laws, rules, and regulations. So it's kind of like think about an Oreo cookie with the chocolate cookies on the outside and then the stuffing inside. And if you think about Exodus 1 through 19 as one chocolate half and Numbers 11 through 36, stuffed into the middle of that is 50 chapters of laws, rules, and regulations. And that's intentional because they all go together. This is really abstract. Let me make it a little bit more concrete. In Exodus 20, the Israelites arrive at Mount Sinai, and there's smoke, and there's thunder, and there's lightning, and they are around the mountain, and Moses goes up on Mount Sinai to make the covenant with God. Last semester we talked about the word covenant, and hopefully those of you who transferred classes talked about covenants as well. I talked about covenants like marriage. I promised to my wife that I would love her, honor her, cherish her. She promised that she would love and honor and cherish me. We each promised that we would be faithful, good times bad, till death do us part. And then we sealed that covenant with a ring as a reminder of our covenant. And we talked about the structure in the covenant with God and Noah and the covenant with God and Abraham. And this is the covenant at Sinai between God and Israel, with Moses, the prophet, as the mediator. And God is offering something to the people of Israel, and Israel is going to offer something to God in return, and then they're going to seal it with a sign. And if you think back to my picture just a moment ago, I guess I can go back to it, the Israelites part of the covenant is all that stuff down here at the bottom of the screen. All the laws and rules and regulations are going to follow. the purity laws, the kosher laws, the ritual sacrifice laws, the Levitical codes. And what God is offering to them is God is leading them out of slavery, and God is bringing them to the promised land. So again, going back to here, the covenant, God has led them out of Egypt, led them out of slavery in accordance with the covenant with Abraham, and God is going to bring them to the promised land. And the people of Israel are going to follow all these laws and rules and regulations. So again, God has freed them from slavery in Egypt. God has worked all the miracles against the Pharaoh and the Egyptians, and God is going to bring them to the promised land. And what is it that Israel can do in return for that? Israel can keep the law. It can keep the holy days. It can keep the Sabbath and the Day of Atonement, and it can do the ritual Holocaust, and it can build all the priestly vestments and priestly items. So it's a covenant. Instead of, like my wife and I have equal things that we're giving, God is doing this great thing for Israel, and Israel in return is going to keep God's law. It's their chance to show God how much they appreciate. So we need some sort of tangible reminder, some sort of physical thing to remind them of the covenant, and that's actually going to be the 10 Commandments, known as the Decalogue, which are going to be carved onto stone tablets, that they represent the entire covenant in Mount Sinai. Just as the little gold ring on my finger reminds me of all the promises I made 25 years ago, the Decalogue, the 10 Commandments, remind the Israelites that God brought them out of slavery and brought them into the promised land. And this is what they do in return, is all the laws and rules and regulations that go with it. And of course, if you've got this covenant and you've got the sign of the covenant, it would be nice to put the sign of the covenant in some sort of, shiny place, just like I have a gold ring that reminds me of my covenant. The Israelites are actually going to build a chest, or the word ark, the same word that's used for Noah's ark and the little basket that Moses' mother makes for him. They are going to make what's called the Ark of the Covenant, which is going to be a fancy gold box into which they're going to put the tablets of the 10 Commandments to remind them of the covenant at Mount Sinai, the covenant where God brought them out of slavery and brought them into the promised land. And then all these rules and regulations aren't a burden. They're what they can do to show their gratitude and appreciation for all that God has done for them. So you should have that pretty well filled out. If not, then go ahead and rewind and write some stuff in here. And when you're ready, I'm going to advance to the next page and give you a list of terms that you should be writing down in your notes. I would suggest that you turn to a nice, fresh page in your notebook and write down each of these words and skip a couple of lines in between each of them. Leave yourself some room to add definitions later. Some of these things are repeated material from last semester, and as I told you at the beginning of the semester, if I'm going to test you on anything from last semester, I'm going to reteach it. So some of you might feel that you don't really need to write anything down, and when you submit your notes, it's okay if you just have the list of words right here and no definitions next to them. You are going to do an in-class assignment, a quiz called Torah, and a lot of these are going to be discussed, and there's an opportunity to write definitions then. Some of you might look at this list of words and feel like you know it, and so that's fine. You don't have to take any notes eventually. I am going to repeat what all these terms mean. In later activities, I'm going to use these terms throughout the course. So covenant, Decalogue, theophany, Torah or Torah, Pentateuch, Holocaust, Shoah, and Tanakh. And again, all I need is a picture that shows me that you have these terms written down. You've got some space to write definitions if you choose to later, and that you're ready to take notes later on. Or if you choose, if you feel like you know all these terms and you're not going to confuse any of them, then you don't have to. But at least I have a record that you wrote down that these are words I will cover on the next test. So again, pause the tape if you need to. Write them down. Leave some room to write down definitions. If you want to write down some rough definitions for some of them right now, that's fine. You'll notice that I mentioned some of these already in this video. But you don't have to have anything written next to these when you submit your notes. You can, but you don't have to. Turn to another page in your notebook. Nice fresh piece of paper, ready to take some ideas down. I've decided that on our next test, on our first test of the semester, I'm going to go in depth into some of the Jewish holy days and describe what they are, when they're celebrated, how they're celebrated, or what it is that they're commemorating. So again, as with the previous list of words, all I need to see when you submit your notes is that you have dedicated a page where you've written down these terms, you've left some room to write some definitions. It's fine if you want to jot down a few things about these. I would ask you to pause before you write down a definition for Pentecost, because Pentecost is a Jewish holy day that has a different significance than Christmas Pentecost. Christians took the Feast of Pentecost, changed it, just as we have changed Passover and Sabbath. So Sabbath, Passover, Pentecost, New Year, Rosh Hashanah. I will not expect you to know the Hebrew on the test. The Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, which I will not expect you to know the Hebrew term for it. The sabbatical year, the Jubilee year, and Yom HaShoah, which is called Holocaust Remembrance Day. And I'm not sure if I'm going to put that on the next test. I would like you to have that in your notes. Typically, I'm teaching class in late January when the United Nations and the United States celebrate a Holocaust Remembrance Day. And that's actually different from the day that Israel celebrates it, when Jewish people do it. Jewish people celebrate Yom HaShoah, or their Holocaust Remembrance Day, later in the spring, and there's symbolic significance to the dates that are chosen for that. So again, please put in your notes, even though it's possible that Yom HaShoah will not be on the next test. So your job is to take a picture of the notes you took on the covenant at Mount Sinai, and that's material that's going to get you ready to do the Torah assignment in class. It's a pretty extensive one. You should have a picture of a page with all of the vocab terms that are going to appear on the next test. It's possible I will add to that list, probable that I will add to that list, and then submit a picture of a page that has this list of Jewish holy days. Again, you don't need to have any descriptions written next to them. We're going to fill that in over the next few days. So you have now unlocked the Torah assignment, which I am planning to have you do in class on Monday or Tuesday. You are welcome to do them at home, but and it might be actually good to do at home if you're one of those students who likes to get ahead and leave some options open for extra credit. And I will end this tape right now. Go ahead and fast forward or pause as you need to, and I'll see you in class.